It's with great pleasure I return to Breaux Bridge at a very opportune moment. I was born in Breaux Bridge, 1939. I've been told that I was one of the few born right after St. Paul Hospital was inaugurated. Much has changed since the 1940s when I grew up. Let me give you an example. I live 3 blocks from here on South Main. When I was born, we had a cow in the backyard to provide milk. On Sundays, we had chicken dinner, but you didn't go to a supermarket and buy a chicken. You bought a live chicken, and you got home and did that to the chicken. Entertainment. What did we do for entertainment in those days? We listened to radio, and we had 3 movie theaters. Some of the people that in the audience might remember them: the Carmen, the Dan, and the Tesh. We didn't have air conditioning, so we kept our windows down, and every Saturday night, living on South Main Street, I would be put to sleep by Cajun music from the Wild Cherry Club. You might remember that. We had a rudimentary telephone system where you would crank something, and Teddy Conrad's telephone system, the operator would answer, and you would give her the number you wanted to call. Telephone numbers of our system were 2 digits. My grandfather, David Trahan, in his old grocery store had number 30, and our home had number 70. Speaking of David Trahan, my grandfather on my mother's side, over 100 years ago, he was the mayor of Breaux Bridge when this bandstand was erected. Everybody was poor in those days, but nobody knew it. We had 2 doctors, Dr. Young and Dr. Morrow, and they made house calls. What did everybody drink as their adult beverage? Beer. What were the 3 brands? Jack's, Falstaff, and Dixie 45. Only around Christmas would you crank out the bourbon whiskey, and you mixed it with Coke or 7-Up. By the time the 50s came around, we started getting creature comforts, like milk being delivered to our back door. And actually, I can remember the milkman would knock on the back door, come in the house, take away your old milk, and put new one in the refrigerator. We didn't buy cottage cheese from the supermarket. When milk went bad, you put it in a bag, and you tied a string, and you hung it from a tree. And the juices would flow out, and what was left in the bag was cottage cheese. Then you would take sugar and pineapple, mix it together, put it in the freezer, and you had a great dessert. We had black and white TV, but we had 3 channels, one in Lake Charles, one in Alexandria, one in Baton Rouge. Everybody had 1 TV if they were lucky by the mid-50s, and you had to go to the TV and crank the antenna around to point to the 3 cities whenever you changed channels. You remember that? When a fire broke out in town, the telephone call went to the convent. The nuns were the ones who answered the phone, and they turned on the siren. And everybody in town was aware that a fire was going on. You didn't dare go on Main Street after the siren flew, because Pat and Paul Tierney were coming down at 100 miles an hour to go to the firehouse. I chose to stay at St. Bernard instead of going to Breaux Bridge High School. We had a dirt floor basketball court that we practiced on. When I graduated, we had 12 total boys in high school, but we still managed a winning basketball team. We were lucky enough once in a while to practice in the old Armory Hall. Our coaches were Father Roy and then later Father Bork. Those that are old enough can remember the outstanding high school band that we had in the mid-50s. Harry Gregg was our director, and he was smart enough to say, hey, this is the Breaux Bridge High School band, but a lot of talented kids go to St. Bernard. So he went to Sister Teresita and said, I want to offer the opportunity of St. Bernard students to be in the Breaux Bridge High School band. Yours truly included. Breaux Bridge knew how to make big things happen, including the 1959 celebration of the founding of the city. Right down in the middle of town, with Cajun bands, Fado Dough, Crawfish, etc. It was so successful in 1959, they decided to continue it the next year and rename it the Crawfish Festival. The rest is history. So Breaux Bridge knew how to do things in a big way, including support its military, including active duty forces, the 156th Infantry, and the 20th Special Forces Group. We had 2 high schools. We had very little vocational guidance at the time. I probably could have been approved for going to one of the academies, but I was not smart enough to know I could apply. So how did we get role models at that time? We looked to neighbors, we looked to relatives. I had to look no further than my next door neighbor on one side and 2 doors down, the neighbor on the other side, for 2 role models. Both rose to the Air Force Lieutenant Colonel rank, A.J. Terrio Jr. and Whitney Tronho Jr. Here's another example of proximity of outstanding Air Force officers or Army officers in Breaux Bridge. Lieutenant Colonel Dewey Coles was a highly decorated veteran that received 7 Bronze Stars in the Korean War. Within 100 yards of growing up with Fred Patin, highly decorated World War II veteran who earned the Silver Star with Valor. He jumped in on the D-Day invasion. He later became our postmaster. And again, within 100 yards of growing up was Lieutenant Colonel Johnny Raymond, who served in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam, and earned the Silver Star decoration. He's been recognized as the father of the Royal Thailand Armed Services Special Ops Unit and the Thai Rangers. Speaking of Johnny Raymond, as you might all remember, he had this annual event to install some of us into the Breaux Bridge Chamber of Commerce Hall of Fame. Every time we were inducted, a real nice plaque was made. Here's a sample of my plaque, and I understand they will be remounted in the hallway in City Hall soon so that you can look at them. There was a family during World War II that lost 5 children or 5 servicemen in a single accident, a ship going down. They were called the Sullivans. You might have seen the movie. So 5 members from the Sullivan family perished. As a result, a law was passed to preclude brothers from the same family serving together in the same war. The Patin family from Breaux Bridge disregarded that and had 3 sons simultaneously serving in Vietnam. Larry James in the Navy, and Carl and Kenneth John in the Army. We recently buried Pojo Marvon, as you know. He flew 125 combat missions, many of them over North Vietnam. His brother Dane Marvon also flew the Skyraider A-1E Special Ops airplane. Together, Pojo and Dane earned 20 Bronze Stars, signifying over 200 combat missions during the Vietnam War. Here's other examples. Colonel George Birch flew 120 combat missions in World War II and 60 combat missions in Vietnam. These are all examples of Breaux Bridge guys doing their thing. In World War II, Shirley Ray Trumps and Sam Broussard Sr. both served behind enemy lines in what was called the OSS, Office of Special Services, or Strategic Services, and that became the CIA. Trumps rose to colonel and went on to serve in Korea. Joe Lachele participated in the World War II invasion on Normandy Beach and led his platoon of the first breach of the Siegfried Line in the Battle of the Bulge. At least 5 Breaux Bridge veterans, and there are probably more, served in all 3 wars, World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. The ones we know of are Lynn Berard, Nolan Castile, Shirley Ray Trumps, Alvin Dupuy, and Johnny Raymond, of course. Breaux Bridge has supplied many outstanding military members for the 20th Special Forces Group of the Louisiana Army National Guard, many of whom I grew up with, including Larry Thibodeau and Leonard Guidry. In fact, Colonel Fred Patin was one of the founding members of that group as a company commander. The Army Rangers that I've worked with very extensively in the special ops business have an annual competition of 2-man teams to designate a two-man team as Best Ranger. The event is known as the Ranger Olympics. This is a 3-day grueling competition of physical and mental tasks in which the participants don't know what those tasks are going to be until they arrive at Fort Benning. The winner of the 2002 competition was Captain Dwayne Patin of Breaux Bridge. And finally, there is the story of profound courage of Ralph LeBlanc, nicknamed by his fellow crew members Frenchie. On December 29, 1946, Ralph was the pilot of a PBM float plane that was part of Admiral Byrd's exploration of Antarctica and the South Pole. His plane was in a whiteout, iced up, and crashed into a snowbank. He was badly burned and badly injured. 3 of his 9 crew members perished on that crash, but 6 survived. His fellow crew members stuffed him into a sleeping bag and took care of him as best they could. He lost circulation to both legs and gangrene set in. Several books have been written, articles have been written about his courage, not complaining about his injuries, and never complaining about not being able to participate with his other crew members. After 2 weeks, his wreckage was found, but the only location a rescue airplane could come to was a water area 10 miles away. So his 5 other crew members fashioned a sled and put Frenchie on the sled and trekked through the snow and sub-zero temperature for 24 hours to get to the open water to be rescued. He then had to have both legs amputated and spent a year in a hospital taking care of his burns. I can still remember him when I was growing up in Breaux Bridge. He passed away in 1994. We honor him and his courage today. So this is the story of Breaux Bridge warriors who served their country. They were quiet professionals that did not need a ticker tape down Fifth Avenue, knowing all they needed was to be given a mission and doing their best to accomplish it. That was satisfaction enough. We pay tribute to them today on this hallowed ground and with this memorial. We will never forget them. My 26 years in the Air Force were primarily in special operations, in units few people existed, many of which were top secret. The highlight of my career was my squadron being selected to fly the lead airplane and to supply 4 of the 6 C-130 crews to clandestinely insert into Iran to try to rescue the hostages in 1980. We were to insert the Delta Force, Army Rangers, and fuel for the helicopters so they could rescue the hostages from the embassy. We trained in secret for 5 months, were never discovered, and then we clandestinely moved the task force without anybody knowing it to Egypt. Then those of us who were going to fly night 1 of the 2-night mission clandestinely flew to an island off the coast of Oman from which to launch night 1. You might think that you're flying a mission of national significance and prestige of the United States, that there would be air-conditioned shelters and hot food, so you would be at your best for this mission. Not so. The mission was so secret we had to self-deploy, which means we went to base supply and got sea rations. Meals ready to eat had not been invented yet. We got some tents, mess kits. When we arrived at the remote airfield in Oman, we set up, subsisted on sea rations and canned soft drinks. Bottled water hadn't been invented yet. We even were conscientious enough to bring a one-holer outhouse with us, since portalettes also had not yet been invented. Being raised in Breaux Bridge and Breaux Bridge, I knew what a one-holer was all about, and I had to acquaint my city crew members as to what was the thing all about. At least we had toilet paper. When I was growing up and we'd go to the country, we had corn cobs. After the mission failed, that awful night, we got our wounded on their way for medical help in Germany. I was the commander of 5 of the 8 fatalities that night and had the hard task to call the roll to see who got killed so the notification of families could be done. After retreating to our tent city to get some much needed rest and private grieving, we were startled by a pickup truck that pulled up next to my tent. As it turned out, the little airfield on this island, the tower control operators were British citizens, contract workers. They had listened to President Carter on BBC and Voice of America and had put 2 and 2 together. The night before, they had seen 6 C-130s leave, and 8 hours later, only 5 returned. So they somehow in Oman got 2 cases of cold beer, put them in the back of the pickup truck, came around to our tent city and dropped them off. And with foresight, they took a pencil, took a cardboard flap on the beer box and typed or wrote the following inscription: "To you all from us all for having the guts to try." I tore off the flap, put it in my flight suit pocket, nursed it back to the States, and it now is mounted at the U.S. Air Force Special Ops Command headquarters at Hurlbut Field, Florida. I highly recommend the book if ever you get a chance to read it, with the same title. I have often been asked the following question: you were the commander of the brave air crews who risked their lives to rescue fellow Americans, but through no fault of your own or your crew members, the mission did not achieve its objective. How did the failure to rescue the hostages affect you? Your career could have blossomed had it been a success. The failure of the mission did significantly affect me, but I was always finding comfort by words uttered by President Teddy Roosevelt in his famous arena speech given April 23, 1910, which I will quote verbatim. "It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort, without error or shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows at the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails daring greatly. For that his place will never be with the cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat." Thank you, Teddy Roosevelt, for those words. The mission to rescue the hostages did not work out, but it resulted in the formation of the outfit at Fort Bragg that I had the honor of being a founding member as the first Chief of Air Operations, called JSOC. Google JSOC and you'll see what I mean. JSOC is the parent command of SEAL Team 6, Delta Force, other elite forces that, of course, were in the shadows for 25 years until finally Osama bin Laden mission and the Somali pirates mission ended up with high publicity for them. So, JSOC, we thank you for your work. They were not cold and timid, as were not the Breaux Bridge military people as well. So the representative, or our next speaker, Secretary Strickland, is here, and in gratitude for you taking the time out, I'd like to give you a copy of the book called The Guts to Try. Thank you for your time.